Okay, this one is gonna be just power packed. The reason why it is because it's with someone that I think is pretty awesome and I think that you might like. It's 3 parts because we talked for like way over an hour. So I'm trying to make it more manageable. So I'm breaking it into 3 parts. Each topic we're gonna just dive deep into anxiety, depression, boundaries, life, things that no one really told me about. So if it's just for me, great. If you get anything out of it, awesome. So this is the first part. I'm really excited. I'm interviewing someone I care deeply about and who's really helped us, my wife and I. Her name is Tammy Arthen. She's our counselor. She wrote an amazing book I highly recommend. I'm gonna link it down in the description below so you can check it out. And she graciously said yes to doing the interview. I thought, man, how cool it would be to have someone who's a professional in this to kind of speak to some of these things, give you handles and equip you so that you can be a better version of yourself. And then we can, talk and do what we need to do desperately is have conversations. You, me, talk, and be cool with disagreeing and understanding each other and all those things. So let's get into this thing and get dirty. Let's go. If you wouldn't mind, for people that don't know you, just a little bit about who you are and your life.
So, as you said, I'm Tammy Arthen, and I have a private practice in Issaquah, counseling practice, where I see about 28 patients a week on average. I have 2 daughters. I'm married, 2 daughters, 14 grandkids, and not all from those 2 daughters, some stepkids in there. We have a big family bush.
Yeah.
We don't have trees in our house. I grew up in Seattle. I have 3 brothers. My parents have been married for a million years. And I love to play. That's why I work, so I can play.
Wow.
That's the main thing.
That's
and
cool.
I love to help people be their authentic selves. That's my goal.
Quick question. I know this is kind of a bigger one, but what got you into doing what you do, counseling?
God. We went round and round. So I went to college at first to be a physical therapist, and I played fast pitch softball in college. And then as a physical therapist, I realized that the parents weren't willing to do the therapy for their kids. These kids might have had a major disability where they needed a parent to stretch them and whatnot, and the parents weren't putting their kids through that difficult, therapy because they weren't focused on the long plan of helping them. But I was like, somebody needs to work with the parents. And so I took a sociology class and a psychology class, and I loved it. And so I switched over to social work at that time. And then I transferred to the UW. And during that time, I always hung out with old people. And my best friend was older. I was, 20 and she was 41, and she developed cancer. And so I ended up being her caretaker. And then that got me interested in death and dying stuff. And so then I ended up being married and had kids. And when I went back for my master's degree, I focused on death and dying because also at that time, each one of my grandparents died, one right after another. And so I helped with all of their deaths as well. So I ended up going and getting my master's degree and kind of with a focus on death and dying. And then I got a job in hospice. And so I loved that. And then ended up moving to a critical care position so that I had more of a consistent schedule for my kids. Loved the medical side of things. And while I was in that position, I ended up that my little brother got cancer when he was 30. So I became his caretaker. And in that process, I couldn't work during the day. So then I switched to the ER at nights. And while I was in the ER, I would start seeing a lot of people who had more. I saw the trauma side, which I loved, but then I also was seeing people who were coming with depression, suicide attempts, anxiety, which, looked like a heart attack. And so it was almost a interesting thing because I loved that work, but it was like God was, I would talk to somebody in the ER and they would be like, can I come back tomorrow and talk? I'm like, no, this is an emergency room.
Right.
But I felt like God kept pulling me to do counseling, and I was like, I didn't feel good enough to do that. I didn't feel trained to do that, And so I ended up hating my job eventually because it was so discouraging. I got to, the ER started getting so busy as mental health facilities started closing down with all these severe mental health cases and a lot of drug and alcohol. And I really wanted to work with people, like either in trauma or death and dying or, some more of because the system was so broken, it was so discouraging to me, that I couldn't really provide the help necessary. So anyway, long story short, God and I kept having a battle. He kept pushing me towards counseling, and I just resisted it until an opportunity came out, and I just talked to a guy. He offered me a job, and I had to get tested. I suck at testing, and I had to go get licensed, and so that was a big to-do. And anyway, I ended up in that. And in that process, what really happened is I became sort of my own counselor through what God was telling me to tell other people. And I developed a motto that said I wouldn't tell you to do something that I either hadn't done or wouldn't go do.
Wow.
I figure it was good enough for you, it's good enough for me. And so I went through a lot of healing as a therapist myself, just listening to stuff that was coming through for other people. And so that's how I ended up doing my own private practice eventually, and now I just am there because I love the one-on-one time and seeing people grow. So
just wrecking people in the best way.
Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting is it is so every single experience in career-wise that I had, none of it was something I planned.
Yeah.
In fact, I never did ever work with kids with disabilities. I never worked with kids actually, and that's exactly what I thought I would do. Never was a physical therapist. So everything, life kept taking me to this path, but I can see it so clearly, obviously in hindsight, looking at how they all build on each other.
Wow.
So.
That's amazing.
So here we are, yeah.
Yeah, and to this day.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have a list of questions.
Okay.
And actually got quite a few of them on Instagram. I pulled a poll out and people were super curious. So I thought, what a better person to do it than someone who's like an actual professional at this. Okay, so first question, in my opinion, is that it seems like anxiety is rampant. My 2 cents is I don't feel like social media does a whole lot to help in that regard. In one hand, being that it seems like, this is just my guess, it feels like we're meant to be a people that are more of a small group. We don't like not being exposed to millions of opinions and comparison and all the stuff that social media gives you, this like view of everyone and all these things and all this opinions and hate and love and whatever. Like in my brain, if we were designed that way, that we'd somehow be able to just like not need social media. We can just connect and know everyone's thoughts. But now that we have access to this, it was like, comparison or I don't know. There's just a lot of issues that have come up from it. And obviously that's not the only thing. We're humans and we've struggled a lot in life in general, whether it be a job or a marriage or I don't know. But I know what was revolutionary for me when I first saw you was like, hey, did you know what this is? Because all I knew was like I just felt these things and I didn't know what to do with it and I thought it was normal. So my first thought or question would be, would you maybe kind of define what that looks like? What is anxiety? So people like myself can go, oh, that's kind of what that is. And then, I don't know, anything you think is worth sharing, like this is how ways you can address it or anything you feel like is worth sharing on the topic.
So the easiest definition of anxiety is excess worry. It is what it equals. So there's we all have anxiety. We need it to survive. But the average person worries 3 to 5% of their day. People with an anxiety disorder worry 50% and up of their day. And I call it the spin cycle, that when a thought comes in, it has to go through a spin cycle before it gets put out. And, I'm in my head. These are when people say things like, I'm just a thinker, or I'm just a worrywart,
right.
Or I get nervous. Right. So those are signs of probably more than the average type of worry. But we kind of normalize that. But I think that when you worry more more hours of your day than not about random things even, that's a pretty good indicator that you probably are dealing with more of a anxiety issue or disorder.
Wow.
So there's lots of different, there's like obsessive compulsive disorders, a type of anxiety, panic attacks, specific phobias. Generalized anxiety disorder is more when somebody worries broadly about a lot of different things. Some people have really specific, like they don't drive on freeways or they won't. But when it stops us from living a life that we are capable and wanting to live, it's worthy of being treated. Anxiety is very treatable. And what makes me feel sad often is that it is very familial. It can be hereditary. It can be, so, you have a mom that worries, so then she does all the warnings of all the different things that could happen. So then the child ends up worrying about all the things that could happen. And so it's always a what if, and the blank is filled with a negative. Well, what if the plane crashes? What if this happens? What if I get sick? What if somebody dies? What if? And usually you can go back to a child because the downside with anxiety is you worry a lot. But the upside of anxiety, as I've shared with you, they're my favorite people because they're intuitive, they're insightful, they're empaths, they feel deeply, they think deeply. They're the kind of, as kids, they walk into a room and they notice when the pillows are changed. Or, like I have a grandson who will say, "Oh, Nana, you got some new earrings, huh?" And it's like, at 4, who notices that?
Wow.
But Dom does. But very aware of their environment. They read people's emotions. The downside is that goes into a story, which then we worry about.
Right.
So if somebody's sad or looks upset, are they upset with me? What did I do? What can I do to fix it? And pretty soon you see this pattern of frantic action on the child's part, or I need to get the heck out of here. Wow. So anxiety is related to our fight and flight mechanism. The reason that it's on the rise is, we're noticing it more. We're calling it what it is. But the more choice we have, the more anxiety we have. So if I give you 10 things to avoid, it's like, what's the right thing to do? And so we have more choice, which is why in third world countries, there's not as much anxiety because they have less choice.
Wow.
You're going to eat this meal.
Right.
You might have a choice of a second meal, but there's not going to be which restaurant do we want to go to or what clothing item do we want to wear. You have this. So anxiety is really not as big of an issue because they're not riddled with choice. The other part of social media is there's not a whole lot of positive stuff. If you turn on the news, they're not telling you all the wonderful things in the world. It's extremely tainted. And most media feeds on the what if with a negative outcome. We want control. Anxiety wants control.
Right.
We want predictability. We want to be assured that nothing will happen if, we cross the bridge and we're afraid of bridges, But it is, so it comes from the comparison, but really it also comes from the story we tell ourselves. That
Which is huge.
We're not good enough. We're not, there's the negative, they call it negative connotation. I mean, thought distortions where like we predict what you're thinking. It's like you guys are talking, you're talking about me, and pretty soon my anxiety runs up, right? I'm worried about that.
And they could be talking about their nails.
Most likely we'll be talking about something else. I think it's 93% of the things we worry about never happen.
Wow.
And the other 7% that it does happen, it's never as severe as we thought. But when the worst case thing happens, we survive it anyway.
Wow.
It's like I had a little girl one time who would loved gym. She was in gym every day, and she was going across the balance beam. So she would get in her head, and what if I fall? What if I this? And she was 12, and sometimes stuff comes through, and I'm like, that was good. That didn't come from me. So I said, well, what if you fall? She's like, I'm going to crack my head. And I said, well, what's going to happen then? She says, well, I'm worried. What if I die? And I said, well, what if you do die? Let's just go with your worst case. And she was like, okay, you fell, you cracked your head, now you're dead. Well, I wouldn't know it because I'm dead. And I'm like, exactly. And she's like, so really, I don't need to worry. It's not like I'll know if I'm dead because I'll be dead. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, okay. And she goes the next day and she does it's just like, oh, because she hasn't really,
Wow.
at some point, we all have this need for control. So, anxiety is a joy robber. It's always about the future. Depression is about the past. It's about regret. It's about wishing we had done something different often. And pure joy is really about today. That's where we sit with, when we can be today, we have contentment. When we're focused on what's here, what's now, not what if
Wow.
or what has been, you're truly able to be present. And so I would say probably 90% of my caseload has anxiety legitimate disorder, whereas they worry more parts of their day than not.
Wow.
And worry robs them of joy that they would otherwise have. So some of the ways you can tell when people are anxious is they fidget a lot, they pick their fingers, they will be spinning quite a bit, moving around a little bit when you're talking to them, being aware of what's kind of going around. So I just watch body signs as well. They yawn, especially men.
Really?
When they get nervous, because they don't pick up on their body, feelings, but they're breathing a little bit faster, and so they're not getting that full breath. And
Weird.
but yeah, so it's very interesting. Or like if you ask I notice it more with boys and men, but you'll ask them a question about something that might be an emotional trigger for them, and you'll see them yawn, and it's very interesting.
Weird.
I just watch for how people watch other people when they're doing things, and that's usually a good sign. It's one of the indicators I look for. If you're talking to somebody and they're doing this, they're probably worrying a little bit about what somebody's thinking or whatnot.
So, another thought I had was, because everyone can't come see you, which is my desire.
Nice.
Is there anything that's like here's some basic steps to stop living in that?
So there's a study out that showed that with picking up your body's early cues of anxiety, along with doing some therapy, sometimes medication as well, because it is a physiological. Anxiety is not just in our head. We have more serotonin neurotransmitters in our gut than we do in our head.
Wow.
So serotonin, there's like 5 major neurotransmitters that affect mood. And so one of the things is accepting it as a medical issue, a biological issue, rather than a weakness. And getting over the stigma of mental health is huge. First step.
Yeah.
Just to acknowledge
Right.
that wow, maybe this is something I ought to look into or research a little bit more. So you can't tell somebody who's anxious to not just don't think that way. That actually
It's the worst.
what is it? I think Louise Hayes says, if you keep telling yourself you don't want it, you will soon. Because
Wow.
when we tell ourselves, I can't have something, I don't want something, I shouldn't. Shoulding on ourselves is bad. Should, ought to's, those are signs that we're trying to manage some level of discomfort. I should go see this person. Because what happens if I don't? They're going to be disappointed. And then you can
Right.
see where the future trip goes.
Right.
So catching yourself in those words can be a sign of early intervention to be able to turn that into something you want. Because, again, the earlier cues that you get and the intervene on, the better your outcomes are for treating anxiety. So I was saying one of the studies will show that with early detection of what's happened physically, and like doing breathing, meditation, cognitive changes, rewriting some stories, you actually can rid yourself. Like the statistic was, I want to say 82% of people with generalized anxiety disorder practicing early detection and treating of the actual anxiety symptoms didn't qualify for the diagnosis 2 years later. So what does that look like? One of the examples a gal gave at a recent seminar I was at said, like, her husband's late for work. So she looks up at the clock and she all of a sudden already, just by the fact that she's noticing that, what she didn't notice is her breathing's getting a little shallow, her heart rate's getting a little up, she's getting a little bit anxious, her little fight or flight. Right there would have been the best time to start and take deep breaths through your nose, slow through your mouth, just to be aware that physically, because guess what? The more you get in the spiral of anxiety, the narrower your thinking becomes.
Oh, wow.
So,
true.
it's your fight or flight, right? If a tiger is chasing you, you're not going to be going, I think it's getting closer, but let me just analyze it, You're going to be like, everything's going to get narrow, and you're going to turn your thinking parts off, and we run. Well, that we do that on a small scale all the time when we have this, when we let ourselves go with the worry. He's probably in a car wreck. What do you think's going to happen? And pretty soon she's pacing, and now she's got all these stories, and she's calling him, and he's like, babe, don't you remember I told you I had a dinner meeting tonight? Oh, yeah, thank God you're fine. But she just went through a major, and so it raises, now again, it's, imagine running from the tiger, you're sort of tired.
Yeah.
Right? And so early detection, breathing, distraction, helping yourself turn a ought to into a want to. Because when we have control, I want to come out here. I want to, for example, somebody who feels overwhelmed by chores. They might say, I've got to go clean the bathroom. You're not going to change that probably until I want to go clean my toilet.
Right.
But you can say, I want a clean toilet. So when you change that, just that story, I choose to do something rather than I have to do something. Because again, anxiety wants to make us, we feel overwhelmed when we tell ourselves we ought to, should, have to, versus I choose to.
Wow.
It's why diets don't work for people.
Right. 100%.
Because they tell themselves they can't have something, which really reinforces the anxiety. Because they're now thinking, if you tell somebody, don't think of this cup right here for the next 10 minutes, they're going to fight to not think about it, but they're going to think about it. Versus, you can think about it all you want, if that's what you want to focus on. So you change that into a want. So early detection, changing the story, but you can't do that when your body's in anxiety. So you got to calm down first, and then you can start changing your thinking. Anxiety is treatable, I guess, is the main thing I want people to know. And so finding a therapist, finding literature, understanding how important calming our whole brain down, whether it's a mini meditation, like where you just stop what you're doing and just think of all the sounds coming in the room. That will actually start calming you down. Now your body's like, okay, there really isn't a tiger chasing me. I can actually think about that cat that just approached me. So, yeah.
Seriously, God bless people who are willing to go into these fields and help with mental development. I just ran down the stairs, so it's fine. In all areas, you know what I mean? Grateful. We have doctors, scientists, all the other people that I clearly am blanking on right now. Thank you, because our lives are better because of it. Okay. Go out there, have good conversations, understand, listen, let people be heard. Because we're better together, baby. Peace.